A wounded deer limped to the edge of the forest, only to be met by a golden dog she hadn't seen in years. No one believed animals could remember, until Sonny did. He didn't bark, he didn't chase. He simply stood still, waiting for the friend who never forgot him. What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe animals deserve love, not pain, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The morning mist hung low over Timberline Valley, a sleepy mountain town nestled against the pine-studded foothills of the Oregon Cascades. The late autumn air carried a quiet chill, enough to numb fingers and whisper secrets through the trees. It was the kind of place where time seemed slower, where even the wind held its breath. Pine needles glittered faintly with leftover frost, and above them, the sky clouded and pale hinted at snow that hadn't yet decided to fall. Deputy Logan Fields shifted in the seat of his patrol truck, parked at the edge of Forest Service Road 12. He was 25, tall and lean, with a jawline that hadn't quite lost its boyish sharpness. His uniform still looked new, too crisp against the weariness in his hazel eyes. A faint scar crossed his right brow, barely visible unless you looked closely, and his brown hair was cropped short beneath his cap. He had only been assigned to Timberline 6 months ago, but the town already felt like a weight he couldn't shake. The reason wasn't the people. It was the shadow of his older brother, Chris Fields. Chris had been a ranger here, respected and relentless. Last winter, he'd gone missing for 3 days while pursuing a tip about illegal trapping. They found him in a ravine, neck broken. The official report read, "accidental fall," but Logan never bought that. Chris was careful, too careful to slip like that. Logan had come not just to serve Timberline, but to uncover what had really happened. His radio crackled. Static. Then silence. Logan sighed, reached for his thermos, and stepped out into the brittle morning. That was when he heard it. A bark, sharp, clear, and impossibly familiar. Another bark followed, urgent now, echoing off the trees. He turned, heart skipping. It came from the trail just beyond the tree line. And then he saw him. A flash of golden fur, legs moving fast over frostbitten earth. The dog turned, barked again, then sprinted into the woods. Logan's breath caught. It couldn't be. He hadn't seen that dog in nearly a year. "Sonny," he called out, disbelieving. Sonny had been a legend around Timberline, an aging golden retriever with deep amber eyes and a coat like honey in sunlight. 7 years old, with a faint scar along his hind leg and a gentleness that made even the most standoffish folks pause. He used to visit the local senior home with a retired nurse, comforting residents with his calm presence. But after a forest fire last fall, he'd vanished. No one had seen him since. Yet there he was now, unmistakable, leading Logan deeper into the forest. Logan followed, boots crunching over frozen pine needles, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The trees thickened, light dimming beneath the canopy. Sonny kept ahead, but never out of sight, glancing back just enough to guide him. It was almost human, the way he moved, not frantic but intentional, as if he wanted Logan to see something. Then Sonny stopped. He stood rigid at the edge of a narrow gully, his tail still, his eyes locked on something below. Logan crouched beside him and followed his gaze. There, tangled in the undergrowth, was a deer. A young doe, her coat trembling with each breath. Her leg was caught in a snare, a rusted metal loop buried deep in her flesh, slick with blood and dirt. She didn't bolt or thrash. Her ears twitched, eyes wide with pain. But she stayed still. Sonny took a step closer, whining low in his throat. The deer didn't react, only blinked slowly as if she recognized him. Logan's breath fogged the air. The snare was old, possibly one of the illegal traps his brother had been investigating. Rage flared, but he pushed it down. He pulled off his gloves, his hands steady now with purpose. "It's okay, girl," he murmured, reaching for his radio. "I've got you." But the radio hissed again, dead signal, too deep in the forest. He'd have to do this alone. He pulled a folding knife from his belt and carefully approached. Sonny stayed by the deer's head, lying down close but not touching, eyes full of something ancient memory maybe. Logan knelt beside the doe's mangled leg and worked the blade under the wire. It had cut through muscle, nearly to the bone. She flinched but didn't kick. Either she trusted him, or she was too weak to fight. The wire came loose with a snap. The deer jerked, then collapsed fully onto her side. Logan wrapped her leg with a strip torn from his undershirt, working quickly to stem the bleeding. He looked up once. Sonny hadn't moved. His eyes never left the doe. For a long moment, the three of them stayed like that, cop, dog, and deer, in the silence of the pine forest. Logan suddenly felt something deep shift in him. Not just duty, not just instinct, something older, something sacred. He had no idea that this moment was only the beginning. The rusted gate of the old ranger station let out a groan as Logan pushed it open with his shoulder, one arm carefully supporting the injured doe's front legs on the makeshift tarp sling. The building stood like a forgotten ghost at the base of Timberline's western ridge, its cedar shingles warped, paint peeling in long flakes like old scabs, and windows fogged with grime and years of silence. Weeds curled up through the cracked stone steps, and a thin breath of wind whistled through a broken window frame on the second floor. The place smelled of moss, old wood, and something faintly metallic-like memory left too long in the dark. Sonny walked ahead, silent, steady, tail low. He knew this place. That much was clear. The station had been decommissioned after the forest fire a year ago, the same fire that had consumed part of the southern range and scattered wildlife and patrols. It had once housed a full crew of rangers. Now it stood as little more than a relic. Logan had only been here twice since his transfer to Timberline, and both times it unsettled him, not for what it was, but for what it had once been. Inside, the air was cold, the kind of cold that didn't belong to weather, but to emptiness. Logan cleared the main floor utility room, brushing aside cobwebs with the sleeve of his jacket, and lowered the deer gently onto a pile of old canvas. She flinched, her breathing quick and shallow, but didn't try to rise. Sonny curled beside her without hesitation, resting his head close to her shoulder, his eyes fixed on hers in quiet vigil. Logan knelt nearby, digging through his first aid kit. "We'll need antibiotics, real ones. This'll only hold until I get back," he muttered, mostly to himself. He tied a new wrap from gauze and surgical tape over the bloodied leg, checking for deeper infection. The wound was bad, but not hopeless. Yet it wasn't just the injury that concerned him. It was how the deer reacted to Sonny, not with panic, not even with fear, with familiarity. He rose and stepped out into the adjacent room, a former break area lined with dusty lockers and storage cabinets. His flashlight swept across abandoned chairs, peeling maps, and dented metal drawers. One cabinet still had a tag: Christopher Fields. Logan paused, breath caught in his chest. His brother's old locker. He reached for the handle but stopped as the light caught a smudge near the floor, a sheet of newspaper, curled and yellowed. He knelt and tugged it free. It crumbled slightly at the edges. A smear of something dark and rust-colored stained the bottom. Blood? The headline read, "Timberline Rangers crack down on wildlife poaching. 4 arrests, 2 fugitives remain." The photo beneath it showed a line of uniformed rangers, his brother Chris at the center, stern-faced and proud, hand on his utility belt. The article was dated nearly 2 years ago, months before Chris's death. Logan stared at it, heart pounding. This wasn't just a forgotten article. Someone had placed it here, and that stain it wasn't old water damage. He folded the paper gently and slipped it into his jacket pocket. As he stood, the back door creaked. He turned fast, hand instinctively moving toward his holster. But it was just Sonny, peering back through the doorway, his ears pricked. Logan followed him out to the back of the station. The yard was overgrown, half swallowed by forest, but near the base of the boundary fence, he noticed something odd, deep, familiar paw prints. Sonny's, yes, but older ones too. He crouched, tracing the tracks. They had been here more than once. Weeks ago, maybe months. Sonny had returned to this place. Repeatedly. "Why here, boy?" Logan murmured. Sonny looked back at the station, then at the doe, then settled beside her again, sighing through his nose like he was tired of trying to explain something no one could understand. The deer blinked slowly. Logan sat against the wall and watched them. Man, dog, and deer, an impossible trio, bound together not by logic, but by something else, something that felt a lot like loss. Outside, the gray clouds pressed lower. Pine branches whispered. Logan couldn't shake the weight in his chest. He thought of his brother, of the report he never trusted, of the pain in his mother's voice when the official story didn't match what she knew of her son. Now, here he was, with a bloody newspaper, a dog that had disappeared, and a snare wound fresh from the same kind of trap Chris had been investigating. There were too many pieces to pretend it was coincidence. The light began to fade. Logan laid out a thermal blanket for the deer, left a water dish nearby, and closed the door to block the chill. Before he headed back to town for supplies, he turned to Sonny. The dog didn't lift his head, just gave a single thump of his tail against the floor. Logan smiled faintly. "Stay with her, Ranger," he said softly, using the word deliberately. And Sonny did. The morning sun filtered through broken panes in the ranger station's roof, laying golden strips of light across the dusty floor. Logan stood at the threshold, steaming coffee in one hand, watching the slow rise and fall of the young doe's chest. She had made it through the night. That alone felt like a quiet victory. Sonny lay curled beside her, one paw outstretched but not touching, his body relaxed, yet his eyes never far from her. The connection between them had grown harder to ignore. Each time Sonny shifted, the deer whom Logan had started calling Aspen lifted her head and followed him with slow, steady eyes. Not fearful, not startled, but searching, as if trying to remember something just beyond reach. Logan stepped inside quietly and knelt down to check her bandage. The wound looked cleaner, less inflamed. He smiled as Sonny gave a soft thump of his tail against the wood. "She trusts you more than she trusts me," he muttered. Aspen blinked slowly, then lifted her neck and tilted her head towards Sonny. The gesture was subtle, but Logan saw it recognition, as if a memory had stirred somewhere deep in that wild mind. That thought gnawed at him as he loaded supplies into his truck later that morning. If animals remembered, what did Aspen remember of Sonny? Why had she not bolted at the sight of a predator? Why had Sonny led him straight to her? It didn't make sense, unless they had met before. Logan drove south along the ridge trail, dust rising behind his tires. He had a name scribbled in his notebook, passed to him by Sheriff Kane, a local recluse, who might know more about Timberline's wildlife history than anyone else alive. Mrs. Eleanor Delaney, late 70s, lived alone in a cabin beyond the southern fence line. She was once a wildlife rehabilitator, back when Timberline still had a functioning animal care program. Officially retired. Unofficially still watching everything. Her house sat on a slope just above Trout Hollow, nestled between two ancient Douglas firs. A wide porch, faded rocking chair, wind chimes made of ceramic spoons. Smoke puffed from the chimney, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Logan knocked gently. A moment passed before the door creaked open. Mrs. Delaney stood in a shawl that looked hand-woven, a long gray braid falling over one shoulder. Her face was weathered but kind, with deep lines at the corners of her mouth and eyes that were still sharp. "If you're selling something, I've already got it," she said, without smiling. "I'm Deputy Logan Fields. Sheriff Kane said you might help me with something unusual." She studied him a beat longer, then opened the door wider. "Then you'd better come in. The coffee's still warm." Inside, her cabin smelled like pine needles, cedar smoke, and cinnamon. Photos of animals lined the walls: deer, owls, a black bear with a healed ear, even a young golden retriever mid-leap. Logan's breath caught. That dog looked like Sonny years younger. "You recognize him," she said, following his gaze. "Is that—" "Sonny," she nodded. "He was brought to us when he was barely 6 months old. Escaped a kennel fire. Sweetest pup I ever raised. Had a way of calming the other animals just by being there. We used to call him the Quiet Ranger." Logan sat, heart ticking faster. "You worked at the Wildlife Center?" "Ran it," she said, pouring him coffee. "Until the funding dried up and the poachers filled the woods. I closed it down the year before the fire. I found Sonny yesterday," Logan said slowly. "He led me to an injured doe. Young, maybe 2 or 3 years old. Her leg was caught in a snare, but she didn't run from him. She acted like she knew him." Mrs. Delaney's eyes narrowed slightly. "A young doe, small white spot between her shoulders?" Logan nodded. "Well, she breathed. "That's Aspen. She has a name? I raised her, or tried to." Her voice softened. "She came to us as a fawn, maybe 3 weeks old. Her mother was hit by a truck just outside the preserve. Aspen never bonded with the other deer, but with Sonny, he'd lay next to her pen every day. She'd press her nose to the wire, and he'd just sit there like he was keeping watch. They were never supposed to touch, but sometimes, she smiled faintly, sometimes they just knew. Logan leaned forward, goosebumps prickling his arms despite the fire's warmth. They knew each other. They remembered, she said. I always said animals carry memory different than we do, not in words or names, but in smell, sound, feeling. Sunny and Aspen, they had something gentle between them. I thought it was gone when we lost the center. They found each other again, Logan whispered. Mrs. Delaney's expression softened. Then maybe not all was lost. She stood and crossed to a cabinet, rifling through an old tin box until she pulled out a Polaroid. It showed Sunny and Aspen smaller, softer, noses nearly touching, through the mesh of a juvenile enclosure. The photo was dated almost 4 years ago. Logan took it carefully. This changes everything. Don't let the others tell you it's not real, she said firmly. That kind of bond, it doesn't disappear. It waits. When Logan returned to the station that afternoon, the sun was slanting low, throwing long shadows across the forest floor. Aspen lifted her head as he stepped inside. Sunny rose slowly, stretched, then padded over and nudged Logan's hip. Logan knelt and placed the Polaroid beside him. You remember, don't you? He said softly. You knew where to go. Sunny wagged his tail once and returned to Aspen's side. Logan watched them, two creatures separated by instinct and species, and yet bound by something deeper. The past wasn't gone. It had returned on 4 legs through the trees, in a language older than words. Snow had fallen silently during the night, blanketing the forest floor in a thin, shimmering layer of white. The early light of morning broke through the treetops in golden shards, catching on each frozen branch and giving Timberline's woods the look of something ancient, untouched. Logan zipped his jacket higher against the cold and adjusted the strap of his sidearm. The air smelled clean, like pine needles and ice, yet something underneath. Something older and bitter tugged at his senses. Sunny had been uneasy since before dawn. He'd paced the perimeter of the ranger station with low, anxious growls, tail stiff, ears twitching. Aspen remained inside, curled near the fire, her wounded leg healing slowly but steadily. Logan had opened the back door to let in some air when Sunny suddenly barked sharp, deep, insistent, and bounded down the slope toward the northern tree line. Logan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his thermal gloves, called in his location via radio, and followed the golden blur into the trees. The snow crunched underfoot as he trailed Sunny, who moved with the urgency of memory. Logan had learned to trust that rhythm. Sunny didn't wander. He led. His paws punched clear tracks in the powder, his body low and focused, weaving between trunks, across a frozen creek, then uphill into thicker forest. The clouds above grew heavier, grayer. Somewhere deep in Logan's chest, he felt a knot tighten. Nearly 40 minutes into the trek, Sunny stopped abruptly at a break in the trees, where the wind had swept the snow into a swirl of white powder. Logan caught up, breathing hard, and froze when he saw what lay ahead. A clearing, half hidden by drooping pines, opened to reveal a dilapidated wooden structure. An old animal pen, or holding shed, collapsed in on one side. The roof sagged under the weight of years and snow, and the iron gate that once enclosed it lay twisted on the ground. Logan stepped cautiously toward it. The air here smelled different, dank, coppery. Sunny didn't enter right away. He stood at the edge, growling low, ears pressed back. Logan crouched beside the frame. On the ground, half frozen into the snow, a dark red smear stretched from the entrance inward. Blood long dried, but unmistakable. It stained the wood, soaked into earth and snow, like a memory that refused to be buried. Near the back wall, tangled in debris, he spotted something metallic chain links, and beside them, a single broken collar. Logan pulled it free with a gloved hand and turned it over. Stamped faintly into the leather, nearly worn smooth by time and weather, were the letters L-U-C-K-Y. He stared at it, pulse hammering. Lucky, he whispered. That was your name. Sunny stepped closer now, tail low, eyes fixed on the collar. Logan looked at him. Really looked. The scar on Sunny's hind leg, the wariness in his body, the way he had flinched at chain sounds back at the station. All of it made sense now. Sunny hadn't simply disappeared after the fire. He had been taken. Logan turned his attention back to the structure, ducking beneath a charred beam and sweeping his flashlight across the far wall. Metal hooks protruded from the wood, some still bearing scraps of old rope or collars. Deep grooves were scratched into the floorboards and scattered along the edge of a rotted wooden crate. He spotted teeth marks, canine by the look of them. His stomach turned. This wasn't just a holding pen. It had been part of a trapper's camp. And judging by the signs, animals had been chained here, confined, maybe even prepared for sale or transport. Sonny had once been one of them. A gust of wind pushed snow through the cracks in the wood, sending flurries spinning across the interior. Logan turned to leave when something caught his eye. Buried beneath a collapsed drawer was a notebook, its corner just visible under broken boards. He pried it free carefully. The cover was stiff with damp, the paper inside curling, but the writing remained. Short lines, symbols. Some entries were lists of numbers and dates. Others were hand-drawn maps, but more chilling were the marks. Strange coded symbols, often beside phrases like "cleared 3 heads" or "East Ridge, avoid, too exposed." Logan flipped through it, jaw tightening. These were not journal entries. They were logs routes, drop-offs, animal tallies, poacher shorthand. One page made him pause. It showed a crude sketch of the Timberline Southern Range, with a symbol marked X right near the spot Chris had gone missing. Logan stood frozen, breath fogging. The book trembled slightly in his hand, not from cold, but from something else. Confirmation. He stuffed the notebook and collar into his pack and stepped out of the ruin. Sonny stood waiting, ears still alert. Logan gave one slow nod. "You got out. You survived this place," he said. "And now you brought me back." Sonny didn't react, only turned and started down the hill again, glancing over his shoulder to make sure Logan followed. He did, boots crunching in steady rhythm. The snowfall thickened as they descended. But inside, Logan felt clearer than he had in months. A thread had been pulled loose. Something long buried was beginning to unravel. The wind had changed. Logan could feel it in the way the trees creaked outside, in the way the birds had gone quiet again, and in how Sonny hadn't slept. Not really for the past few hours. Aspen's leg was healing well enough. She had started to put weight on it, though awkwardly, her movements slow and deliberate. Her coat, once dull and matted, was beginning to regain its natural luster. She ate more now, nibbled leaves from a bucket Logan had filled with clover and pine shoots. And when she lay down near the old fireplace in the station, it was always with Sonny close by, their shoulders nearly touching. But that night, something changed. It began with a sound barely audible, a flutter of movement beyond the broken shutters. Aspen's body tensed, ears swiveling. Then, without warning, she let out a guttural, wrenching bleat, a raw cry that echoed off the cabin walls. Sonny sprang up instantly, barking loud and fierce, his stance protective, his gaze fixed on the blackness beyond the rear window. Logan, jolted awake on the cot in the corner, grabbed his flashlight and firearm, moving quickly but quietly toward the door. "Easy," he whispered, one hand on Sonny's shoulder. "Let me see." Outside, the night was windless and deathly still. Moonlight filtered through clouds, barely illuminating the clearing around the station. Logan crouched beside the edge of the porch and scanned the tree line. Nothing, but Sonny wouldn't stop growling. Logan retreated inside, heart pounding. He made his way to the back storage room, where he'd stashed an old security system he'd reconnected just a week earlier. It was limited, just one motion-sensitive thermal camera, powered by solar and mounted above the back slope. He switched on the monitor. Static. Then a flicker. Movement. 2 shapes. Human. One tall and broad-shouldered, the other leaner, moving with a careful, deliberate crouch. Both wore heavy jackets and backpacks. One of them carried what looked unmistakably like a rifle. The other had something shorter, possibly a machete or a crowbar. They stopped just 50 feet beyond the tree line, partially obscured by snow-heavy branches, scanning the area with a flashlight that flickered red as it passed the camera's view. Logan leaned closer, every nerve in his body going still. They weren't hikers. They weren't lost campers. They were back. His hand tightened on the desk edge, and his thoughts spun. What were they looking for? Why now? He glanced at the duffel where he had hidden the notebook and collar found at the old trap site. Had they realized something was missing? Had they come to retrieve it or silence what it revealed? He hit record on the system and saved the thermal footage to the USB device in the port. Sunny hadn't left the window, tail stiff, hackles raised. Aspen now lay silent again, her eyes wide and fixed, but she didn't make another sound. She was watching Sunny. Logan's mind returned to what Mrs. Delaney had told him just days ago, that she'd once placed a camera near the Wildlife Center's rear fence to monitor animal interactions during rehabilitation. That long after the center closed, the camera had still been active, forgotten, perhaps, but still functional. When she checked it the following spring, she found something she hadn't expected. A grainy clip showing a young golden retriever pup pressing its nose through a fence, and on the other side, a tiny fawn touching her nose back, just once, before being pulled gently away by a handler. That pup was Sunny. That fawn was Aspen. Logan hadn't asked for the video at the time. He hadn't needed to. The image Mrs. Delaney painted was vivid enough, especially now. He thought about how Aspen had looked at Sunny that first night, how she never flinched around him. It wasn't just memory. It was recognition rooted in something sacred, something those men outside would never understand. He stayed up the rest of the night, seated by the rear window with the USB drive clutched in his coat pocket and a rifle across his knees. Sunny rested at his feet but didn't sleep, and neither did Logan. The camera didn't pick up more movement, and by dawn, the two figures had vanished into the tree line, their tracks covered by the new snowfall that began just before sunrise. Logan walked the perimeter once more, inspecting the ground, the prints, the broken brush. He found faint boot marks, a discarded cigarette butt, and a small patch where snow had been cleared to reveal something underneath. A wooden board nailed into the ground, flat and deliberate. It was weather-worn, but not rotten. A buried stash point? He didn't lift it yet, not until he had backup. Not until he knew what else they might have hidden in this forest. When he returned to the cabin, Aspen lifted her head slowly. Sunny walked over and pressed his nose against Logan's hand. Logan crouched beside him and whispered, "You did good, Ranger." Sunny's tail thumped once, and for the first time since the night began, his ears eased back down. The air was sharper that morning, as if the forest itself had braced for something long, buried to be unearthed. A thin crust of ice crackled beneath Logan's boots as he made his way around the station, following the path he had scouted the night before. The patch of disturbed snow he'd found near the tree line, where a plank had been nailed flat to the ground, was now covered by fresh flurries, but the memory of what lay beneath pulled at him like a thread tugging loose from a wound. He'd decided to wait until daylight. Now, with the sun filtered through the bare canopy above, he returned to the site. Sunny trotted silently beside him, alert but not tense. Aspen remained in the cabin, her eyes tracking their movements through the frosted window. Logan crouched at the site and brushed away the snow carefully. The board was old, but the nails were newer, driven in with a practiced hand. He pried it free with the back edge of his hatchet. Underneath, wrapped in waxed canvas and hidden among a cluster of rocks, was a small weatherproof box. He opened it slowly. Inside were tools, wire cutters, a coil of thin snare, a hunting knife with a bone handle, and beneath that, a tightly folded black jacket, the kind issued to local forest rangers. He stared at the patch on the shoulder, Timberline Division, Unit 7. His breath caught. The insignia was faded but unmistakable. It was Chris's unit. He lifted the jacket slowly and found something nestled in the pocket. A laminated ID card, muddied, bent at the edges, but still legible. Chris Fields, Ranger Supervisor. His brother's photo stared back at him. And clutched in the same pocket was something else. Smaller, colder. A dog tag. The kind clipped to a collar. It read, "Lucky, Service Animal, Property of Timberline Wildlife Program." Logan's fingers trembled slightly. This tag had belonged to Sunny, but Chris must have had it in his possession the day he died. Why? Logan looked to Sunny, who now sat just beyond the hole in the earth, watching him. The dog tilted his head, ears shifting as if sensing the weight of the moment. Back at the cabin, Logan laid the items out on the table. He plugged in the portable hard drive Mrs. Delaney had mailed him after their conversation. It contained old security footage from the Wildlife Center, a cache she had forgotten until their talk. It had taken days to retrieve, but now it flickered to life on Logan's laptop, grainy and gray. The footage was from a mounted corner cam, facing the outdoor play yard of the old Timberline Rehabilitation Center. The timestamp read July 13th, 4 years ago. In the footage, a golden retriever, smaller, leaner, but unmistakably Sunny trotted into frame, tail high. On the other side of the fence, a young fawn with knobby legs and oversized ears stepped forward. The moment that followed was almost reverent. The two animals approached the mesh, sniffed once, and then, mirroring each other, laid down side by side, separated by nothing but wire. Logan paused the video. There it was, proof of connection. Sunny and Aspen had known each other not just in theory, not as coincidence. They had bonded once, and somehow, through instinct or faith or something older, they had found each other again. He fast-forwarded through later days. More footage showed the two of them growing, Aspen taller, steadier, Sunny stronger. Then a gap in dates. Then a new clip. August 29th, the date of the fire. Smoke billowed in the background. Chaos. Handlers rushing animals into crates. Sunny barked from inside a kennel. The fawn was gone. A handler Logan couldn't tell who held a clipboard shouted something off-screen. In the confusion, a figure in a ranger's jacket, tall, moving quickly, ran toward the back fence with a bolt cutter. The camera shook, then glitched. The video ended. Logan sat back, stunned. Chris. It had to be him. Chris had freed Sunny, maybe more, and the dog tag. If Chris had carried it, maybe it had been his way of keeping a promise. Maybe Chris hadn't just investigated the poachers. Maybe he had stood in their way and paid the price for it. Logan dug through the evidence again, eyes narrowed. He took out the notebook he'd recovered from the trapper's camp. He flipped to the page with the map, crudely drawn, but now painfully clear. A red X sat just yards from the slope where Chris had been found. There was also a symbol nearby, a boot print with a half-circle arrow around it. Logan compared it to the boot mark he had lifted in a photograph the previous spring, a boot tread he had found just yards from Chris's body, one that never matched any known Ranger-issued gear. That same mark now showed up repeatedly in this book, next to entries like return site, gear stored, and most chilling of all, field spooked, reschedule. He swallowed hard. They had known Chris was coming. Sunny let out a low whine and nudged his hand. Logan looked down at the dog, his constant shadow, his unwitting witness. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew the whole time." And suddenly, it wasn't just about the trap or the deer or the memory between two animals. It was about a man who tried to protect them, a man who had carried a dog tag in his pocket like a vow and been hunted for it. The scar wasn't just on Sunny's leg, it was on this town, on Logan, and it was time someone opened it up. The sun climbed higher over timberline, casting a golden wash across the pines and melting away the final traces of snow from the cabin's eaves. Inside the old ranger station, now more sanctuary than ruin, Aspen stood tall for the first time in weeks. Her limp was gone. The scar on her leg had faded into a pale mark beneath her fur. She blinked calmly in the morning light, tail flicking gently, breath steady. Logan watched her from the doorway, coffee in one hand, the weight of decision in the other. He had known this day would come, the moment when healing would meet uncertainty. Aspen was healthy now. She could be released, returned to the wild where she belonged. The forest beyond the cabin pulsed with quiet life, an open world waiting to reclaim her. But Sunny stood beside her, not guarding, not guiding, simply there. They had a rhythm now, silent communication through shared stillness. Aspen would nudge his side lightly each morning before stepping outside. When she rested, it was never far from his paws. And each night, as the forest darkened and Logan took his place by the back window, they would lie beside one another beneath the station's broken skylight, gazing upward through the trees as if remembering something no human could quite understand. The problem wasn't whether Aspen could survive alone, it was whether she should. Logan ran a hand through his hair. He was still dressed in his patrol gear, though the shirt had begun to fray at the collar. He looked older than he had just a month ago, like time had settled deeper into his bones. The last few days had been spent assembling reports. The recovered dog tag, the trapper's notebook, the thermal footage, the old Wildlife Center videos, and the jacket with Chris's ID badge. Every piece had been labeled, time-stamped, and forwarded to Captain Harlan, the regional head stationed down in Corvallis. Captain Benjamin Harlan was in his 50s, broad in the shoulders with a thick salt and pepper mustache and a voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. A former field officer turned administrator, Harlan was known for his no-nonsense approach to enforcement and his loyalty to good men like Chris. When Logan had finally placed the call and told him what he'd found, there had been a long silence on the other end of the line. Then just 5 words. "Send everything. I'm reopening it." Now the investigation was back on the record, but today wasn't about justice. Not yet. Logan stepped onto the porch and watched Aspen walk the edge of the clearing. She stopped once, turned, and looked at Sonny. He rose without hesitation and followed. The choice was hers. But in truth, Logan realized, it wasn't only hers, it was Sonny's too, and maybe, to some extent, his. Later that afternoon, Logan drove down to the hardware store in town. The owner, a wiry woman in her late 40s named Darla Monroe, helped him load lumber and fencing materials onto his truck. Darla was built like a wind-chiseled pine thin, upright, with skin browned from sun and smoke. She didn't ask questions, just eyed the gear and muttered, "Building something, deputy?" "Something like that," Logan said. She gave a brief nod and handed him an extra roll of mesh. "Put it near the creek. Water's cleaner there." By dusk, Logan had mapped out the perimeter. The hybrid zone would start just behind the station and slope into the forest along a gentle ravine, fenced not to confine, but to guide. He wanted it to be natural room to roam, but close enough to return. Not a pen, not a prison. A bridge between the past and what lay ahead. Sonny watched him work from a rock nearby, tongue lolling from effort and curiosity. Aspen grazed along the edge of the clearing, occasionally raising her head to scan the woods, ears twitching at distant crows. The final nail was driven just as stars began to appear. Logan sat in the dirt, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked over the new enclosure. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever would be, but it was honest, a place made with intention, with memory, with hope. He whistled softly. Sonny trotted over. Aspen followed. He opened the new gate. The two stepped through side by side. Aspen paused a few feet in, then turned. She walked back slowly until she stood face to face with Logan. Then she bent her head gently, pressing her forehead against his knuckles. Her breath was warm against his hand. Then, with a flick of her tail, she turned and disappeared into the tall grass with Sonny behind her. But she didn't run. She didn't vanish. She just walked, like someone who knew they could come back. The forest that morning was hushed in reverence, as though it too understood that something was about to change. The mist clung low to the undergrowth, veiling the world in soft silver, while sunbeams filtered through the tall Douglas firs, laying golden trails over the moss-covered floor. Logan stood at the edge of the new enclosure, his breath forming slow clouds in the chill. In front of him, the gate to the hybrid zone hung open, not pushed, not forced, but left gently ajar like an invitation rather than a goodbye. Sonny was already there. The golden retriever, his honey-colored coat catching light in soft waves, the scar on his back leg now no more than a whisper of pain long past, stood motionless near the tree line. His head was high, his stance calm. He didn't bark. He didn't turn back. He simply waited. Aspen emerged from the clearing moments later. Her movements were quiet but confident. Her leg, once wounded and fragile, now carried her with grace. She approached Sonny not with hesitation, but with the surety of trust that had taken years to shape, lost seasons to recover, and silent mornings to mend. She walked to his side and lowered her head, pressing her brow gently to his muzzle. He leaned in slightly. Then, together, they stepped forward, past the fence, past the boundary, past everything that had tried to separate them. There were no leads, no commands, no fences anymore, just understanding. They moved through the tall grass like a memory in motion, gold and chestnut fading into the trees. Logan didn't call out. He didn't lift his camera, he just watched. Behind him, the station remained still old, still worn, but now infused with something alive. Darla Monroe had dropped off extra supplies earlier in the week. Tools, a new generator, a heavy-duty lockbox. She hadn't said much, just nodded toward Sonny once and muttered, "That dog's got more sense than most people." Her voice was always rough around the edges, but there was something soft beneath it now, especially when she glanced at Aspen through the trees. The town had changed in small ways too. Word of the reopened investigation had started to spread, not in headlines, not yet, but in whispers through the local diner, in passing glances at the gas pump, in the quiet nods from neighbors who had once called Chris Fields a hero. Now they were starting to remember why. Logan stepped back into the cabin, now cleaner, organized, humming gently with the sound of a wood stove warming its bones. He poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat at the reclaimed desk, and opened his journal, the same one he'd started his first week in Timberline, when he had no answers and only questions. He flipped to the final page and uncapped his pen. Some friendships don't need to speak. They remember, they protect, and they lead each other home. He paused, underlined the last 5 words, then closed the book with a slow breath. His phone buzzed on the desk. He answered. "Fields," came the gravel-thick voice of Captain Harlan. "We've confirmed 3 of the names from your notebook. 2 are already under federal watch. We need someone local. Someone who understands the terrain, the people, and what we're up against." Logan didn't speak. "Son," Harlan added, tone firm, "you up for joining the task force?" There wasn't hesitation in Logan's voice when he replied. "Yes, sir." "Good," Harlan said. "We've got work to do." The call ended. Logan set the phone down and looked toward the window. The forest was quiet again, the mist fading into the warming air, and the trail where Sunny and Aspen had vanished remained untouched, save for 2 sets of tracks side by side. He stood, stretched, and picked up his coat. There was a case to reopen, and a promise to keep. As to, sometimes, the smallest voices, like the cry of a trapped fawn, are heard not by chance, but by grace. Maybe it wasn't just instinct that led the golden dog that day. Maybe it was something greater, a whisper from above reminding us that miracles often walk on 4 paws, not just wings. In our own lives, we pass by quiet suffering every day. But just like that dog, we have the power to pause, to care, to act. Maybe the real test isn't whether we hear the cry, but whether we choose to answer it. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Take a moment to type amen in the comments and send up a prayer for those who need help but have no voice. May God bless every soul watching this right now. Share this story with someone who believes in everyday miracles. Subscribe to the channel to see more true stories of love and rescue. And may the kindness you show come back to you tenfold.